Welcome back to the Road to City Hall. Public housing has been a hot topic on the campaign trail for mayor, and it gained added importance last week when the city's housing authority announced that more than $200 million in federal spending cuts will force the agency to make layoffs and possibly furlough other employees. Joining me now to talk about those cuts and the challenges facing public housing are the chairman of the New York City Housing Authority, J.Rhea. Julia Vitullo Martin is a senior fellow at the Regional Plan Association who has often written about public housing. Greg Floyd is the president of Teamsters Local 237. It's a union that represents 7,000 Housing Authority employees. Also with us is Manhattan City Councilwoman Rosie Mendez, who is the chair of the City Council Subcommittee on Public Housing. Welcome to all of you.
Full committee.
Full committee. Oh,
Yes.
very good. Congratulations. Let me ask you this, Mr. Chairman, just to get us started. Where do we stand? I've seen testimony and I've seen reports that there are a couple of things going on. That in the operating budget, we have a serious deficit that was just exacerbated by this $205 million taken away because of sequester cuts from Washington. And that there is this, to me, much scarier thing going on, this accumulated capital deficit, meaning the money that has to be spent year after year to keep the place in good working order, or frankly from falling apart. And I've heard numbers in your testimony and from other places that are in excess of $7 billion. What's the number?
Well, Errol, first of all, we didn't just get here overnight, as you said. For the better part of 2 decades, Washington has been cutting its support for public housing agencies across the country. And since New York is the largest, we've taken the brunt of it. Today, we're faced with a staggering over $200 million operating deficit. And the sequester obviously increased what we were facing at prior to the most recent cuts. But the point that's most troubling for us is that there wasn't a plan in place to preserve public housing, to reinvest in it and ensure that the actual apartments could be maintained for the long term. And that's what you were referring to in terms of, we've estimated, and this is based on detailed studies, over $6 billion of unmet need in public housing in New York today. That number across the country is north of $25 billion. So yes, we face some pretty scary realities as it relates to being able to operate day to day, but the bigger threat is that we can't preserve the buildings themselves in the homes of over 600,000 New Yorkers.
From your point of view, how much of this is structural? Because NYCHA is a very peculiar agency. It's sort of a state agency, but it's managed by the mayor and it's funded by the federal government. It almost seems like everybody's got a piece, but nobody has full control of it.
Well, the structure in terms of, who created NYCHA and who appoints the board is not the problem facing public housing. Look, this is not an issue that's solely related to New York City. It's a national problem, and the reality is that the federal government had a contract that it would provide operating and capital subsidies sufficient to preserve public housing. That contract has been broken. The federal government has been very frank about that. They have no intention of appropriating sufficient funding to support public housing on its own. And they've come up with various alternatives and options that include demolition and rebuilding, or for localities to take on a greater support of it. But the reality is that public housing needs new ways of funding itself if we're going to preserve it here in New York, which we've proposed.
With the big cuts that are happening in the operating budget, when we hear about furloughs and layoffs, a lot of these are your members, right, Greg Floyd?
I don't know. The reason I don't know is because I was called about 6 minutes before the email went out. I didn't have a meeting with the Housing Authority. At this point, I don't know where the cuts are going to come from, and it's unfair for me to sit here and have the anxieties of my members and all of the employees of NYCHA not met by telling us exactly where these cuts are going to come from. So the email was sent out. We don't know what's going to happen, and I think we should have gotten to the point we knew about the sequester in January. So therefore, we should have been meeting for over the 6 months to find out if this goes through. What is our plan? What are we going to do? We're here now, but we had 6 months to discuss this, not today. So I don't know where the cuts are going to come from.
Was the hope that the cuts wouldn't happen, that the sequester would be undone?
I feel like I'm in the twilight zone. I've been talking to Greg Floyd and his members for over 4 years about the cuts that are facing NYCHA, not just the cuts from sequestration. And as he said himself, he's known about the cuts since January. So if he was waiting around for the phone to ring, where he represents so many people, I'm not sure why he would do that, and that's not accurate. We've actually been in conversation with his team about the impact of the potential sequestration. We signaled to City Hall, I guess he wasn't listening, and to City Council over 2 months ago, back in March actually, that the cuts may be as large as $250 million, and that we would have to take every action at NYCHA to deal with those potential and looming cuts. So again, to suggest that somehow he wasn't aware or the NYCHA employees weren't aware, because we've been talking to our employees through Plan NYCHA and through many of our internal town halls and other methods to ensure that people are quite aware of the risks facing public housing, from the risk to our community and senior centers, through the risk of preserving our buildings, to the risk of trying to maintain our workforce. I arrived in NYCHA in 2009. When I arrived in NYCHA, there were over 3,000 people who lost their job at NYCHA as a result of the continued cuts from Washington, which Greg Floyd is well aware of. Since I've been at NYCHA, we have not lost a single employee, and in fact, we've actually invested in the front line with more employees because of the actions we've taken to raise new revenues and to cut our expenses. So, I mean, this is not an issue about is anybody aware?
Wait. I want to say something. I did not say I knew about the cuts. I said John knew about the cuts. And you weren't forthcoming. And I shouldn't have to look through Plan NYCHA to seek out what we're doing here. I'm sitting here, I speak English, plain English. So I should have been called in the room and told exactly what the problem is. We could have went down to the federal government. There are other programs that exist. Hurricane Sandy, there are economic development programs. We could have explored all kinds of options. And I don't know if you said you were talking to my members, because they don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on. As a matter of fact, you called me into City Hall about a program that you were supposed to implement to do repairs, and I was supposed to get quarterly reports. I counted 2 quarters. I called for a report. I was told to look on the website. I was told by 2 deputy mayors, Bob Steele and Cass Holloway, yourself and General Manager House, that I would get quarterly reports. This is the second quarter. I don't know what's going on with the repairs.
Well, hold on a second. But let me bring Rosie Mendez in here. Were you and are you aware, in your opinion, in real time, the dimensions of the crisis and where and how much the cuts are gonna hit?
We knew that there was sequestration. There was testimony in March at preliminary budget that it could be as high as $253 million. When we asked, what are you thinking about? They said, well, it's preliminary, we don't know yet. So I believe, and this is where I agree with Floyd, that if some discussion was had as to, we're looking at these areas, then we could have started working with NYCHA and the administration to resolve this. This is in fact what we did in 2008 when NYCHA was planning to close community centers. And myself, which was a subcommittee then with Eric DeLon, Housing and Buildings Chair, and the speaker, Christine Quinn, we looked in the budget, we found $18 million, we saved 25 community centers from closing, now known as the Cornerstone Initiative, which has been baselined last year in the budget. And we did the same thing with DFTA when the community centers were going to close 2 years ago.
Department for the Aging, the senior
Yes,
centers.
Department for the Aging. So if there is discussions, we can work together, minimize impacts on the most neediest people.
Okay, let's take a short break. I want to get more into the particulars of how we move beyond the fact and who told who about the problem, and more into solutions. We're going to do that with this special panel in just a moment. Also tonight, we'll show you a new website that aims to get New Yorkers connected to their elected officials. And later, a new book argues that cities are the key to the country's economic growth. We'll talk with one of the authors of The Metropolitan Revolution, a very important book. Stay with us.